Palermo, Sicily, in the basement of a specially constructed bunker courthouse, a building that had to be built from scratch because no existing courtroom in Italy was secure enough to hold what was about to happen. 475 men are on trial simultaneously. Not 10, not 50, not 100. 475. They sit in iron cages bolted to the courtroom floor. Armed guards line every wall. Snipers are positioned on the roof. The Italian army has surrounded the entire city block. These 475 men are the leadership, the soldiers, the financiers, and the associates of Cosa Nostra, the Sicilian Mafia, the most powerful, most feared, most untouchable criminal organization in the history of the Western world. For over a century, they had never faced anything like this. Because for over a century, no prosecutor had ever been able to prove what everybody already knew. That was about to change. Because sitting in a prosecutor's office in Palermo, in a filing cabinet that had taken 11 years to fill, was the complete financial record of Cosa Nostra. Every account, every transaction, every payment, every bribe, every murder contract, every dollar. And the man who had compiled it, the man who had sat inside the most dangerous criminal organization on earth for over a decade, counting their money with one hand and building their destruction with the other, was not a cop, was not a soldier, was not a spy. He was an accountant. The true story of the man who sat inside the Sicilian Mafia for 11 years and destroyed it in 48 hours. To understand what happened in that courtroom in 1986, you have to understand what Sicily was in the decades before it. Not the Sicily of postcards and tourism brochures, not the Sicily of sun and coastline and ancient temples. The real Sicily, post-war Sicily, was a place where the official government existed in name only. The real power, the real law, the real economy, the real system of justice and violence and money belonged to Cosa Nostra. The Sicilian Mafia was not simply a criminal organization. It was a parallel state. It controlled which businesses could operate and which couldn't. It decided which politicians got elected and which didn't. It ran the construction industry, the agricultural supply chains, the heroin trade, the protection rackets. Judges who ruled against it were assassinated. Prosecutors who investigated it were killed. Police officers who got too close disappeared. Between 1978 and 1982 alone, Cosa Nostra murdered over 1,000 people in Sicily. Politicians, magistrates, rival bosses, innocent bystanders. It killed the president of the Sicilian regional government. It killed the head of the Palermo police. It killed the chief prosecutor of Palermo. The message was consistent and absolute. We are untouchable, and anyone who tries to touch us dies. For decades, that message had worked. Investigators had tried. Files had been opened. Cases had been built, and one by one, those cases collapsed. Those investigators were transferred, intimidated, or buried. Cosa Nostra had survived everything the Italian state had thrown at it. For over 100 years, it had survived because it had one absolute advantage over every agency that tried to bring it down: money. Its financial operations were so sophisticated, so deeply embedded in legitimate Sicilian and Italian business that no outside investigator had ever been able to map them comprehensively. You can prosecute violence, you can prosecute murder, but without the financial evidence, without being able to show how the money moved, where it came from, where it went, you can never prosecute the organization itself. That was Cosa Nostra's ultimate shield. And it was about to be taken away by a man named Antonino Calderone. Antonino Calderone was born in Catania, Sicily, in 1935. He was not a dramatic figure, not a warrior, not a strategist. He was, by every account of people who knew him, a quiet, precise, deeply intelligent man who had a gift for numbers and an instinct for systems. He understood how money moved, how accounts could be structured to obscure origins, how legitimate businesses could be used as covers for illegitimate transactions. He also understood something more fundamental, something about the organization he had been born adjacent to his entire life. Cosa Nostra, for all its violence, for all its power, for all its mythology, ran on paperwork. Every criminal empire does. The bribes have to be tracked. The protection payments have to be recorded. The heroin shipment revenues have to be accounted for. The legitimate business fronts have to maintain books that could survive a superficial audit. Somebody has to do that work. And in the Catania branch of Cosa Nostra, that somebody was Antonino Calderone. He became associated with the organization in the early 1960s, not as a soldier, not as a boss, but as the man who understood the money. And for the next 2 decades, he processed it. Every transaction, every account, every payment in and out of one of the most profitable criminal enterprises in the history of organized crime. He sat at his desk. He opened his ledgers. He ran the numbers. And quietly, so quietly that nobody noticed, he began keeping a second set of records. This is where things get dangerous. The decision Calderone made to begin documenting Cosa Nostra's financial operations in secret was not a dramatic moment of moral awakening. It didn't happen overnight. There was no single event that pushed him over the edge. It was slower than that, quieter than that. He had watched, over years, what the organization did to people who got in its way. He had processed the payments that funded those actions. He had seen the names in the ledgers, politicians, judges, police commanders, and understood what those payments meant, what they were buying. And somewhere in the quiet of his accounting office, doing the work that nobody glamorous wanted to do, he made a decision. He was going to document everything. Not to hand over immediately. Not to go to the police, because the police, in Sicily in the 1960s and 70s, were as likely to be on Cosa Nostra's payroll as to be genuinely working against it. But to record, to create a parallel archive, a shadow set of books that told the true story of where Cosa Nostra's money came from and where it went. He photographed documents. He made carbon copies of transactions. He memorized names, dates, to account numbers. He built a picture of the organization's financial architecture that no outside investigator had ever come close to achieving. And for 11 years, he kept it hidden. The risks of what he was doing were almost impossible to overstate. Cosa Nostra did not tolerate betrayal. It did not give warnings. It did not negotiate. People who crossed the organization were killed, not quickly, not cleanly, in ways designed to send messages to everyone who knew them. Calderone understood this completely. He attended their meetings. He processed their money. He sat across tables from men who had ordered murders the same morning they were discussing quarterly accounts with him. He maintained his composure, his precision, his reliability. He was, in every outward sense, exactly what Cosa Nostra believed him to be: a loyal, indispensable financial operator who kept their books clean and asked no dangerous questions. Inside, he was building the case that would destroy them, but the organization around him was changing. And those changes were about to make his position extraordinarily dangerous. In 1981, Cosa Nostra erupts into the most violent internal conflict in its history, the Second Mafia War, a faction led by the Corleonesi clan, brutal, paranoid, and more violent than anything the organization had previously seen, begins systematically eliminating rival bosses. Not just rivals, their families, their associates, anyone connected to the losing side. Over 1,000 people are killed in 2 years. The Corleonesi win, and under their new leadership, Cosa Nostra becomes something different. Something more dangerous, more paranoid, more prone to seeing traitors in every corner of its own organization. For Calderone, this is the moment everything changes. Because the Corleonesi don't trust anyone from the old structure. They begin reviewing every associate, every affiliate, every financial operator connected to the previous leadership. They begin asking questions about loyalty, about where certain money went, about certain accounts that don't balance the way they should. Calderone can feel the walls closing in. He has 11 years of secret documentation. He has the most complete picture of Cosa Nostra's financial operations that has ever existed. And he has, by his own later estimation, approximately 6 months before the Corleonesi find something in his records that gets him killed. He has one option. He needs to find someone he can trust with everything. Giovanni Falcone. If you know anything about the history of the Italian Mafia, you know this name. Falcone was a Palermo prosecutor who had spent years building cases against Cosa Nostra using a new approach, following the money rather than chasing the violence. He understood, earlier than almost anyone in Italian law enforcement, that the way to destroy a criminal organization was not to prosecute individual crimes. It was to map the entire financial structure, to show how the money moved, where it originated, how it was laundered, who it paid, to prosecute not just the soldiers but the system itself. The problem was he had never had the inside access necessary to build that map comprehensively. Until Antonino Calderoni walked into his office. The meeting between Calderoni and Falcone is not extensively documented in public records. What we know is this: Calderone came with documentation, 11 years of it, and what Falcone saw spread across his desk in that prosecutor's office in Palermo was something he had spent his entire career trying to build. The complete financial architecture of Cosa Nostra, what happened next, would change Italy forever. What Calderone handed to Falcone was extraordinary, not just in its scope but in its precision. Names of mafia bosses connected directly to specific transactions. Bank accounts in Switzerland, the United States, and Germany that received Cosa Nostra heroin revenues. Records of payments to politicians, including sitting members of the Italian national government. Documentation of construction contracts awarded to mafia-owned companies through a network of shell corporations so complex it had taken Calderone years to fully map. Records of the payments made to corrupt police officers and judicial officials. And most critically, for what would become the Maxi Trial, a complete organizational chart of Cosa Nostra's leadership structure. Who reported to whom? Who authorized what? Who knew about which? Operations. The financial records didn't just prove individual crimes. They proved conspiracy. They proved that every member of the organization, from the street-level soldier to the highest boss, was part of a single, coordinated criminal enterprise. This was the legal theory that would make the Maxi Trial possible, and it was built entirely on the numbers that one accountant had spent 11 years compiling at enormous personal risk. Falcone takes Calderone's documentation and builds a team. A group of prosecutors who become known as the Palermo Investigative Office, later called the Anti-Mafia Pool. They work in secret. They work in shifts. They understand that what they are doing is extraordinarily dangerous. Falcone himself has already survived one assassination attempt. His phone is tapped by Cosa Nostra. His movements are tracked. He sleeps in different locations every night. He travels in armored vehicles. He communicates with his team through systems designed to evade mafia. Surveillance. For 2 years, from 1984 to 1986, Falcone and his team use Calderone's documentation to build the case that will become the Maxi Trial. They cross-reference the financial records with police surveillance data, witness testimony from other informants, and international banking records obtained through legal cooperation with Switzerland, the United States, and Germany. Every piece of evidence is documented, verified, bulletproofed, because Falcone knows something that every prosecutor who had come before him had learned the hard way. Building the case against Cosa Nostra is only half the battle. The other half is making sure the case survives everything the organization will do to destroy it. And Cosa Nostra tries everything. Witnesses are threatened. Some recant. Judges connected to the case receive death threats. 2 members of Falcone's investigative team are killed. There are leak investigations attempts to identify where Falcone is getting his inside information. Calderone's identity as the source of the financial documentation is one of the most closely guarded secrets in the history of Italian law enforcement. If Cosa Nostra finds out who he is a dead man. He is moved, hidden, given a new identity in a secure location. His family is relocated. For 2 years, while Falcone builds the case, Calderone lives as a ghost. No name, no location, no contact with anyone from his previous life. The price of what he has done. But the case is ready, and on February 10th, 1986, the most ambitious prosecution in the history of organized crime begins. The Maxi Trial. The courtroom that was built for the Maxi Trial is unlike anything that had ever existed in Italy. A specially constructed bunker, a fortified concrete structure attached to the Ucciardone prison in Palermo. It took 2 years to build. It cost billions of lire. It was designed with one specific purpose, to be the room where Cosa Nostra faced justice for the first time in its history. On February 10, 1986, it fills 475 defendants. They are brought in through underground tunnels from the prison. They are placed in 30 iron cages arranged in rows across the courtroom floor. And in the prosecutor's section, Giovanni Falcone and his team sit with thousands of pages of evidence. The prosecution lasts 22 months. The defendants shout from their cages. Their lawyers file thousands of procedural objections. Witnesses recant under pressure. There are bomb threats. There are assassination attempts against members of the prosecution team. Cosa Nostra deploys every tool in its arsenal to derail the proceedings. And one by one, every attempt fails. Because the foundation of the case is not witness testimony that can be intimidated into silence. It is financial records, numbers, accounts, transactions. The cold, precise, irrefutable language of money. You cannot threaten a ledger. You cannot assassinate a bank statement. You cannot intimidate a transaction record into changing its figures. On December 16, 1987, the verdicts begin. 19 defendants receive life sentences. 338 defendants receive prison sentences, totaling over 2,665 years combined. In the iron cages there is silence, then shouting, then weeping. Men who had spent their entire lives operating under the absolute certainty that they were untouchable are being told, in the precise language of Italian criminal law, exactly how wrong they were. The verdicts of the Maxi trial do not end the story. They begin a new chapter of it. On May 23, 1992, Giovanni Falcone is driving on the A29 motorway outside Palermo. Cosa Nostra detonates half a ton of explosives beneath the road. Giovanni Falcone dies at the scene. His wife dies hours later. 3 bodyguards die. 2 months later, Paolo Borsellino is killed by a car bomb outside his mother's apartment in Palermo. But here is what Cosa Nostra did not understand. The assassinations did not destroy the Maxi trial's legacy. They cemented it. The methodology Falcone developed, follow the money, prosecute the system, build from financial records outward, becomes the standard approach for organized crime prosecution across the world. Here is the thing about Antonino Calderone that doesn't fit the usual shape of a hero story. He was not innocent. He knew what the money funded. He knew where it came from. He processed it anyway. And yet at some point he made a different choice. He picked up a second pen. He opened a second ledger. And for 11 years he wrote down everything. Every name, every account, every transaction. Giovanni Falcone once said, "The Mafia is not invincible. It is a human phenomenon. And like all human phenomena, it has a beginning, an evolution, and it will also have an end." Organized crime did not end in that bunker courtroom. But something changed there. Something permanent and irreversible. The idea that a criminal organization could be so deeply embedded that it was simply beyond the reach of the law, that idea died in Palermo on December 16, 1987. It died because one accountant kept a second set of books, and because one prosecutor knew exactly what to do with them.